Shane McMahon. Could Shane McMahon soon be the man in charge of Monday Night Raw? Not on camera, of course. We've seen Shane McMahon return to Monday Night Raw recently to launch the new Raw Underground segments, but it's being reported that Shane McMahon could, in fact, soon be in charge of Monday Night Raw behind the scenes. Now, WWE may yet be making another huge change to its creative team, but this time, instead of firing Paul Heyman or firing Bruce Prichard or firing Eric Bischoff, WWE may be looking to add another McMahon to the fold in terms of Monday Night Raw's creative. Now, according to a report from Alex McCarthy, it's the same Alex McCarthy that works for TalkSport. He released this report on Sportskeeda, though. He said that Vince McMahon is considering removing Bruce Prichard from his role as head of Raw Creative, executive director of Monday Night Raw, and replacing him with his son, Shane McMahon. Alex McCarthy said, quote, "Now, one source in WWE has told me Shane is being considered to take Raw off Bruce Prichard's hands, leaving him to concentrate on SmackDown," end quote. Other sources that have spoken to Alex McCarthy that he's posed this information to couldn't give a concrete confirmation, which isn't exactly surprising. I mean, who's going to spoil that great news? Go, oh yeah, Shane McMahon. Once it's announced, it'll be confirmed. I mean, that sounds like a ludicrous statement to make, of course, but that's how things work in WWE at the moment. These are just rumors and hearsay, and you do have to take them with a pinch of salt. Although Alex is very, very credible. But judging by his work behind the scenes, a lot of the people that Alex McCarthy has spoken to said they could easily believe that Shane McMahon could indeed be the next executive director of Monday Night Raw. Another layer to the story, which I think is a big factor in all of this, is that Bruce Prichard has been making no secret and speaking openly that he wants to lighten his workload, and he's been struggling with the long hours. And can you blame him, to be honest? Being the executive director and being in charge of the creative for one show is bad enough. But for both shows, when one of them is a 3-hour broadcast, at the moment, say what you will about Bruce Prichard, I've been quite critical of some of the creative and booking decisions since he's been in charge of not necessarily Raw, because I'm not sure if Raw he really has that much of a hand in it, which might sound a bit crazy to say, but when he was solely in charge of SmackDown, I was highly critical of some of the booking of that, some of the creative ideas for that. Do we have to mention the Roman Reigns dog food Baron Corbin whole angle? But look, the guy's in his 50s, his late 50s, I believe, and he is in charge of creative for 5 hours of content in prime time, one on cable and one on network television a week. That's too much. That is too much. Going back to the Attitude Era, Vince Russo. The reason he left WWE is because they said you've got to now write, including Raw, you've now got to write for SmackDown. Back then, that was 4 hours a week, and that was him just doing the writing. It's not the case of what it's like now. So even then, it was too much. So now it's absolutely too much, and they need. I know the idea of having Bruce Prichard become the executive director of Raw and SmackDown was to consolidate the creative team during the crazy times of the COVID pandemic. But look, you need to have someone in charge of both shows, of either show rather, because it's just too much. It's too much of the workload, and the quality of the product is going to suffer. So I do think this report does have a lot of legs to it about potentially having a new executive director of Monday Night Raw. Now, Shane McMahon recently returned to WWE after being written off of WWE television last October during SmackDown's debut on Fox. This was during a match against Kevin Owens. A loser is fired ladder match on Fox. It was a good match, but at the time I was very glad to see Shane McMahon off of television. This was the heel best in the world Shane McMahon character that for some reason in 2019 just suddenly became like he wasn't the top heel in the company, but they pushed him as if he was. This was again Shane McMahon, who's nearly 50 years old, being treated like the top guy in the company. He's not even the top worker in the company. Look, I like a Shane McMahon match as much as the next. I really enjoyed his stuff in the Attitude Era and his crazy stunts. Awesome. But he's not the top guy, and he shouldn't be beating the likes of... He beat Roman Reigns at Super Showdown last year, which was just a crime. And too much. So I was glad to see him disappear. I don't have a problem with him coming back now on WWE television. I'd rather I didn't have to have his constant commentary during the Raw Underground segments. That's actually a thing that I don't like about the Raw Underground segments, is Shane McMahon's constant, whoa, oh, amazing, doing this commentary. I think there could be significantly better people for that spot to do commentary on Raw Underground, specifically Daniel Cormier. If I was WWE and I was looking at those Raw Underground segments right now, I'd be looking at Daniel Cormier. I'd be saying, this guy's just retired from UFC. I don't know what his contract is with the UFC in terms of broadcasting, but I'd reach out and say, look, we're doing a whole shoot MMA thing. You'd fit perfectly into this. We don't want you to compete. You don't have to. Obviously, we'd like to see you in a WWE ring at some point. But if you just want to be the host or the commentator for that, we know you can do it. You commentate on the UFC pay-per-views. So why not do that? So I'd like to see that. And that's a thing with Shane McMahon that I'm not massively in favour of when it comes to Raw Underground. But going back to this report by Alex, although Shane McMahon disappeared from TV nearly a year ago, Alex McCarthy has noted that Shane McMahon continued to have a significant role backstage. Now, I mentioned this in a couple of other videos I've done, but it's well known that Shane McMahon played a key role in helping put together the Royal Rumble match, the men's Royal Rumble match back in January, alongside Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar. That was the big story of that Royal Rumble match, wasn't it? That Brock Lesnar, at the time, the WWE champion, was going in first. The first time that's ever happened, and he eliminated everyone that came in, and apparently Shane McMahon was a big factor in putting that together, along with Heyman and with Brock Lesnar. It's also been noted that Shane McMahon has been sitting alongside his father Vince McMahon in the gorilla position for most main roster shows, helping produce the shows and offer ideas. That's no major surprise, because I think he's been doing that for a long time. As soon as he's really come back to the company, whenever they've done these WWE 24 documentaries, a lot of the time you do see Shane McMahon sitting next to Vince McMahon in Gorilla. And this is at the time that these reports were coming out saying, no, Shane McMahon, he's just a talent, he doesn't have any influence backstage, etc., etc. And yet you would still all the time see him sitting next to Vince McMahon in Gorilla backstage. So he's always had, look, he's Vince McMahon's his dad, and Shane McMahon's Vince McMahon's son. He's always going to have the ear of his father. Even though it's not Shane McMahon's company, and Shane McMahon did leave for a period of time, it's a family business. It's always been a family business. Look at people that are in big positions there. Stephanie McMahon was once head of creative, which I need that like a hole in the head. So he's always going to have the ear of his father, and I think this story almost was, I suppose, maybe a little bit of an inevitability. Of course, as I mentioned, Shane McMahon returned to TV recently on Monday Night Raw as the head of Raw Underground. This is actually, there was more to it than just an on-screen element from Shane McMahon. A lot of people speculated that Shane McMahon was just brought back again just as a talent and to run the show, the Raw Underground segments from a storyline point of view. But it's been revealed by numerous talents, including the likes of MVP, and numerous other reports, that Raw Underground is actually the real-life brainchild of Shane McMahon. This is an idea that Shane McMahon himself pitched to WWE. It was a quick turnaround idea. They hadn't planned for it long-term, but Shane McMahon pitched, maybe we should do this shoot MMA style fighting kind of deal, predominantly in Raw's third hour, to attempt to get the ratings up and the viewership up in that third hour, and they went with it, and it looks like they're going to be continue to going with it for a long time going forward. As I mentioned several times, I wonder how much legs this Raw Underground segment really has. Can I see them doing it in a year's time? It does have to evolve, and there needs to be stories that they can tout in there. You can't just have these one-off fights. It does look like they're trying to incorporate some stories in there, whether it was Riddick Moss in his story there, with that, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the Brazilian former MMA fighter there, past Monday Night on Raw. You had Shayna Baszler and the three of the four horsewomen of MMA get involved in that, and Nia Jax got involved there. So they're trying to incorporate some storytelling in there, and I think that's what's crucial to the long-term future of Raw Underground. Can they tell good stories in Raw Underground? We'll have to wait and see for that. But look, the first, in terms of improving the ratings for Raw Underground, Shane McMahon's first big idea, the first week they did it, the third hour did increase. The third hour did increase significantly, and people were saying, "Well, it's a hit." Of course, you never judge things on the first week. You have to judge them over a longer period of time. And the Raw third hour is exactly where it was previously. It dies in terms of the ratings. It's completely, no one bothers to watch it. It's still decreasing in viewership. This past week's show actually got like 1.5 million for the third hour, which is the second worst in its 27-year history of Monday Night Raw. So that Raw Underground hasn't fixed things completely, and I think that's because there's still things to be improved about Raw Underground. As I mentioned before in the Raw Underground video we did here on the channel, Raw Underground as a concept, I think, would interest me a lot more if you had Monday Night Raw as a 2-hour show, and then that third hour is specifically Raw Underground. You don't cut back to what would now be the Amway Center, but previously the WWE Performance Center. You don't cut back to the arena. You don't cut back and continue broadcasting Monday Night Raw as you were before. That third hour specifically should just be Raw Underground. If it's just Raw Underground in that third hour, then you're watching almost technically a different show. And one, the ratings for Raw can go up because it's a 2-hour show. Two, USA Network are getting their 3-hour WWE broadcast because that third hour is still WWE broadcasting. And then if the third hour isn't great, then that's Raw Underground's problem. That's not Monday Night Raw. I think that's the way to do it. Change it up. Make it feel like you're watching almost a different program, but it's under the same WWE banner. I think that's the smart thing to do, because not only would Monday Night Raw improve, because then you're watching a 2-hour broadcast again, but Raw Underground can just be its own thing, and that can be the experiment. And then look, if it doesn't work, of course you can go back to the 3-hour Raws, but who would want to do that in the first place? So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But if Shane McMahon does take over from Bruce Prichard, this, of course, would be the third instance of a shake-up in Raw's creative department since Paul Heyman was hired as the executive director of Monday Night Raw last year. And, of course, it was Paul Heyman, then it was Bruce Prichard, and then now potentially it could be Shane McMahon, the third person in that role in just over a year. As I mentioned, Bruce Prichard is making no secret he'd like to lighten his workload and struggling with the long hours. Again, I don't blame him. I did like in this report that people were stating that Shane McMahon has worked far better with his father during his latest run with the company. I saw that, I was like, what? Sure, why not? But like, again, if there's anyone that's going to be receptive to ideas, it's going to be the guy's father. We've seen now with Heyman, now with Bruce, that in this role, it's difficult to work with Vince McMahon. Paul Heyman was told he was going to get a long period of time to build up stars. Ultimately, he didn't get that, possibly due to COVID. That factored into it, and the ratings went down. Bruce Prichard, I think, is a band-aid for this role. He was just there, let's stop the gap until we can get someone else in. Maybe Shane McMahon's the kind of guy to do it, but the only way to build the product back up is to build new stars. That was going to be Heyman's responsibility, but then they opted to change direction. So we'll have to wait and see. It's a very interesting story, and it's an interesting story when it was first reported. Shane, of course, will be given time. That's without a doubt. Why will he be given time, and possibly more time than the likes of Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff on SmackDown? Because he's the man's son. And he, blood is thicker than water. And I know Vince McMahon is a ruthless businessman, but as I mentioned, he made Stephanie McMahon head of creative when she was in her, was it late 20s, early 30s? And look how that panned out. So Shane McMahon will be given time to implement his ideas. He has had good ideas in the past. This is the same guy that back in the, was it mid-2000s, late 2000s, he wanted Vince McMahon to purchase the UFC, and then they could own the UFC and promote the UFC that way. Vince McMahon declined, and look at where the UFC is today. So Shane McMahon has had good ideas. He was the one that wanted to bring back ECW as a third brand. And now before people go, oh, wow, look at that disaster. Well, the original concept of having ECW back as a third brand is that it was going to be an online exclusive broadcast. It was going to be TVMA. It was going to essentially be the old ECW, but it was going to be exclusively on WWE.com. That was in 2005. Fast forward to where we are in 2020, where everything is live streaming. Everything is streamed on the internet. And look at the success of things that are streamed on the internet. The WWE Network is streamed on the internet. That was way ahead of its time, and it could have been something really special. But the moment that WWE and Vince McMahon and the corporate finance guys in WWE noticed that there was a desire to bring back ECW, and networks were interested in picking it up and networks were willing to pay WWE to broadcast ECW, then it became another example of Raw and SmackDown, and that's why that show was a disaster. But the original idea by Shane McMahon was a very, very good one, so he does have good ideas. And Shane McMahon ultimately left the WWE in 2009. He left for 7 years. Why? Those stories have been discussed and speculated on, but ultimately I think it's because his father didn't give him the opportunity that he wanted in WWE. At that period of time in 2009, Shane McMahon was the same age that Vince McMahon was when Vince McMahon purchased the WWE from his father, Vince McMahon Sr. And at the time, I think Linda McMahon had just left the company. So Vince McMahon, of course, was the chairman. Prior to that, Linda McMahon was the CEO. When Linda McMahon left, I think a lot of people thought that Shane McMahon was going to be made the CEO and Vince McMahon was going to remain the chairman. Instead, Vince McMahon became the chairman and the CEO of WWE, and I think that rubbed Shane McMahon the wrong way as well. There's a lot to pack in that story there. You can go and find that out. It's been reported on extensively throughout the years. But when he came back, initially he came back as just a talent, and he did very well as a talent, but he's the man's son. He's worked his way back up, and now he could be back in power in a significant position again. I don't know if at this point Shane McMahon still has stock in WWE. I don't know. But it's interesting that if Shane McMahon's coming back into power here in WWE, could this be the start of Shane McMahon being groomed as the heir apparent to WWE, to Vince McMahon in WWE rather? I've seen people speculate on that, and a lot of people for many years speculated that Shane McMahon was going to be the guy to succeed Vince McMahon in WWE. Now, everyone knows Vince McMahon isn't going to give up his role as chairman or CEO until his last breath. And, knock on wood, I wouldn't want to see anything bad happen to anyone. But a lot over the last few years, it was speculated that was going to be Stephanie McMahon and Triple H. And it kind of feels like their position in the company has diminished slightly since then. And they're no longer maybe being groomed as the heir apparents to the company. Maybe it is going to be Shane McMahon. It's a very interesting time. It's very Game of Thrones when it comes to the politics of WWE in the boardroom, but maybe this is the start of something significant happening for WWE at a corporate level. Ultimately, they're going back to Monday Night Raw. Raw needs a radical change, and by radical I mean radical. I don't mean Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko. I mean something very radical, because it's a dying show, and it's been a dying show for, gosh, a long time. It's been a dying show probably since like 2000. Well, since it's the highest rating ever, which is what, 2000. Ever since then, it's just been dying a slow death. Every year it loses viewers. The whole pandemic has just sped that situation up, but it still loses viewers. And everyone they've brought in to try and fix Monday Night Raw hasn't been able to do it. Paul Heyman couldn't do it. There are obviously, I think, reasons behind that. Obviously, COVID was a problem there, but ultimately he couldn't fix Monday Night Raw. Shane McMahon will have a better shot at it because he's Vince McMahon's son and he will get time. But look, insanity is doing things over and over again and expecting different results. Shane McMahon will get his shot, but ultimately, do we think it will work? It will probably end in disaster. And I don't mean to sound pessimistic when I say that. All I'm saying is just look at the history. Everyone that comes in, it doesn't work. Why? Because Vince McMahon has to micromanage everything. Vince McMahon is the true executive director of Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown because he's the one that has the final say on everything. So, Shane McMahon will get time, but ultimately I think it would end in disaster. But this could be the start of Shane McMahon getting back on the political ladder in WWE and potentially getting back into a higher form of power within the company. But as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Shane McMahon possibly becoming the executive director of Monday Night Raw? Do you think he has good ideas? Do you think he has bad ideas? How well do you think he'll do? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll be sure to respond and reply to all of your comments. I really enjoy interacting with you guys on this channel. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button. It really does help us out get up the rankings here on YouTube and get into people's recommendation feeds. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to WrestleNews 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. We're closing in on 700 subscribers on that long road to 1,000 subscribers, so if you haven't already, please do subscribe. If you have subscribed already, just know that I really do appreciate it. You can also follow us on our social media platforms. The handles are on the screen right now. The links are in the description box below. It's at 365 Wrestle on Twitter and at WrestleNews 365 on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.